"I don't read contracts, I just sign them." These words, spoken by Jimi Hendrix, set the stage for one of music's biggest legal nightmares. This casual attitude led to a contract that would have far-reaching consequences. Today, you'll learn how this seemingly simple decision impacted Hendrix and his legacy in ways no one could have predicted. The struggling artist, Hendrix's early days. Picture New York City in the early 1960s. The streets are buzzing with music, but one guitarist stands out from the crowd. That's Jimi Hendrix, a young man with extraordinary talent but empty pockets. Despite his incredible skill, Hendrix was just another face in the sea of hopeful musicians trying to make it big. Hendrix's days were filled with struggle. He'd often find himself sleeping on friends' couches or in alleyways, taking any gig he could find to make ends meet. He played in small clubs for measly pay and sometimes busked on street corners, hoping to catch the ear of someone who could give him his big break. The music scene in New York was cutthroat. Record labels were constantly on the lookout for the next big thing, but they weren't interested in Hendrix. His unconventional style, which blended blues, rock, and psychedelic sounds, was too far out for most industry executives. They'd tell him, "Kid, you're talented, but we don't know how to market you." Being a black musician in the 1960s added another layer of difficulty. The industry was still heavily segregated, with many clubs and labels catering exclusively to white audiences. Hendrix found himself caught between worlds, too wild for the traditional R&B circuit, but often viewed as an outsider in rock circles. Despite these challenges, Hendrix kept pushing forward. He refined his craft, wrote new songs, and dreamed of the day when he'd finally get his shot. Little did he know that opportunity was just around the corner. Enter Ed Chalpin, a music producer who saw potential in the struggling guitarist. Chalpin offered Hendrix something that seemed too good to be true: a record deal. For a young musician who had faced rejection after rejection, this felt like a golden ticket to stardom. Hendrix was ecstatic. Finally, someone believed in his talent enough to put it on record. He could already imagine his music playing on radios across the country, his name in lights on marquees. But as Hendrix would soon learn, not all that glitters is gold. The contract Chalpin presented was far from the dream deal Hendrix had imagined. Hidden within its pages were clauses that would come back to haunt him for years to come. As Hendrix picked up the pen to sign, he had no idea he was about to make one of the biggest mistakes of his career. The road to stardom lay ahead, but so did a legal nightmare that would outlive the guitar legend himself. The Devil's Bargain. $1. That's all it took to set in motion one of the most infamous contracts in rock history. At a time when new artists typically received $5,000 to $15,000 advances and 5 to 12% royalty rates, Hendrix signed away his future for just $1 and a mere 1% royalty. Even the Beatles, in their early EMI contract, got better terms than this. In 1965, Jimi Hendrix, a struggling guitarist playing small clubs for pocket change, stood at a crossroads. On one side lay the familiar path of struggle. On the other, a tantalizing chance at stardom offered by producer Ed Chalpin and his company, PPX Enterprises. The contract seemed like a golden ticket, but hidden in the fine print was a trap that would haunt Hendrix for decades: a measly 1% royalty rate, exclusive rights to all recordings for 3 years, and complete control over his music. To a young artist sleeping in alleyways between gigs, these details seemed insignificant compared to the promise of finally making it. As Hendrix's pen touched the paper, he couldn't have known he was signing away his future. But when his career exploded just months later, that single signature would come back to haunt him in ways no one could have predicted. By 1967, as Hendrix topped charts worldwide, Chalpin made his move. PPX Enterprises sued Hendrix, claiming ownership of his hit songs. The guitar virtuoso who had electrified audiences across the globe now faced losing everything he'd built. The court's ruling sent shockwaves through the music industry. the judge upheld PPX's contract, giving Chalpin legitimate claim to Hendrix's recordings. The artist who had revolutionized guitar playing was now legally shackled by a contract he'd signed for less than the price of a guitar string. Faced with losing control of his music, Hendrix had no choice but to settle. The 1968 agreement gave Chalpin a 2% royalty rate and rights to certain master recordings. But just as this legal storm was brewing, Hendrix's career was about to take an unexpected turn. Rocket to stardom, the Jimi Hendrix Experience takes off. Picture this: a smoky New York club, the air thick with anticipation. On stage, a young guitarist's fingers dance across the fretboard, coaxing out sounds no one had ever heard before. In the audience, a man's eyes widen. He knows he's just stumbled upon something extraordinary. That man was Chas Chandler, former bassist of the Animals, and the guitarist? None other than Jimi Hendrix. Chandler was instantly mesmerized by Hendrix's talent. He saw a potential superstar. Without hesitation, he offered to become Hendrix's manager and bring him to London. For Hendrix, it was the break he'd been dreaming of. In September 1966, Hendrix touched down in London. Chandler wasted no time in assembling what would become one of rock's most iconic trios. He recruited bassist Noel Redding and drummer Mitch Mitchell, and the Jimi Hendrix Experience was born. The band's rise was meteoric. Their first single, Hey Joe, hit the UK charts in December 1966, and they quickly followed up with more hits. Are You Experienced, their debut album, spent 33 weeks on the UK charts, only kept from the top spot by the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. In the US, it climbed to number 5 on the Billboard 200. Hendrix's innovative techniques, like using feedback and distortion as musical tools, left audiences and critics in awe. Rolling Stone would later describe him as arguably the greatest instrumentalist in the history of rock music. Hendrix's performances became legendary. His appearance at the Monterey Pop Festival in June 1967 catapulted him to superstardom. Audiences were captivated by his music and his showmanship. He'd play behind his back, with his teeth, even set his guitar on fire. Each show was an event. By the end of 1967, Hendrix had become the world's highest-paid rock musician, earning $18,000 for a single performance at the Fillmore East. His rise from struggling artist to international sensation had happened in the blink of an eye. But as Hendrix's star continued to rise, a shadow loomed. Back in New York, Ed Chalpin of PPX Enterprises was watching Hendrix's success with growing interest. The contract Hendrix had signed for a mere $1 was about to become very valuable. The stage was set for a clash between art and commerce, with Jimi Hendrix caught in the middle. His music had brought him fame and fortune beyond his wildest dreams. But that old contract was about to turn those dreams into a nightmare. Creative shackles, malicious and greatly inferior. These weren't words from a critic. They were Jimi Hendrix's own description of music released under his name. Even as he revolutionized rock with groundbreaking albums, Ed Chalpin was flooding the market with old recordings from their brief partnership. The contrast was stark. At PPX, we spent on average about 1 hour recording a song, Hendrix revealed. Today, I spend at least 12 hours on each song. The contract required Hendrix to produce at least 6 tracks for PPX, including How Would You Feel and Don't Accuse Me, recorded at Studio 76 in New York City. These rushed sessions stood in stark contrast to the meticulous production of his later work. But casual listeners couldn't tell the difference between these rushed early recordings and Hendrix's polished later work. Chalpin's marketing tactics made matters worse. Old recordings where Hendrix had merely played as a session musician were now being packaged and sold as Jimi Hendrix originals. For an artist who had redefined what was possible on a guitar, watching these subpar recordings hit, the market was torture. The situation created a creative tug-of-war. While Hendrix wanted to push boundaries with albums like Electric Ladyland, he was forced to split his time between innovation and fulfilling PPX obligations. It was like trying to write a masterpiece with someone constantly pulling the pen from your hand. As his fame grew, the pressure mounted. That $1 contract wasn't just affecting Hendrix's business affairs, it was threatening to undermine his entire artistic legacy. The price of freedom. The 1968 settlement. Freedom came at a steep price for Jimi Hendrix in 1968 when he faced a crucial decision that would shape his career. The settlement between Hendrix and PPX Enterprises aimed to resolve their ongoing legal battle, but its consequences would echo for years to come. On the surface, the agreement seemed like progress. Hendrix would receive a 2% royalty rate on certain master recordings, up from the original 1% in his 1965 contract. However, the deal required him to produce new material for PPX, keeping him tethered to past obligations even as he tried to move forward. The financial impact was significant. While exact figures aren't public, music industry experts estimate the cost to Hendrix, and his management was in the millions. This settlement was particularly unfavorable compared to other artist-label disputes of the era. For instance, the Beatles had successfully renegotiated much better terms with EMI just a year earlier in 1967. Music industry professionals have debated the merits of this deal. It provided some immediate relief from legal pressure, but didn't address the fundamental issues of the original contract. As one expert noted, the 1968 settlement was a band-aid on a bullet wound. The long-term consequences proved far-reaching. Hendrix gained more creative freedom to pursue his artistic vision, but at a considerable cost. His management team felt frustrated, believing the terms didn't reflect his status as a global superstar. As Hendrix moved forward, the shadow of the PPX contract continued to loom over his career, shaping his approach to the music industry and business dealings for the rest of his tragically short life. Even after his untimely death in 1970, the repercussions of this contract and settlement would continue to affect his legacy and the control of his music for decades to come. The settlement may have bought Hendrix some breathing room, but after his death in 1970, the real battle for his legacy was about to begin. The battle for Hendrix's legacy. When Jimi Hendrix died in 1970, he left behind more than just his music. He left a legal war that would rage for nearly half a century. PPX Enterprises wasted no time capitalizing on his death, flooding the market with old recordings packaged as new Hendrix material. The $1 contract that had haunted him in life was now threatening his legacy. The Hendrix family fought back. Through their company, Experience Hendrix LLC, they launched a series of lawsuits to regain control of Jimi's music, but they faced an uphill battle. PPX claimed the 1965 contract gave them perpetual rights to Hendrix's early recordings. Meanwhile, fans were being misled by subpar releases that didn't reflect Hendrix's true artistry. The financial toll was staggering. By 2003, legal fees had drained millions from the estate. A court ruling that year offered little comfort. While it found PPX had acted improperly, the estate could only recover a fraction of the profits from unauthorized releases. The music industry was watching closely. Hendrix's story became required reading in music business programs. Young artists like Taylor Swift studied his case, leading her to fight for ownership of her master recordings decades later. The Hendrix contract changed how we think about artist rights, one industry expert noted. Finally, in 2014, after 44 years of legal battles, Experience Hendrix LLC and Sony's Legacy Recordings acquired all 88 recordings from Hendrix's time with Curtis Knight and the Squires. The price? In the millions. The resolution has paid off. By 2023, the estate earned $6.6 million in a single year from royalties and licensing, with the total estate value reaching $175 million. A far cry from the dollar that started it all. Today, Hendrix's case has helped create a new music industry standard. Artists routinely demand ownership of their master recordings. lawyers scrutinize contracts for hidden traps. But most importantly, musicians understand what Hendrix learned too late, that sometimes the finest print carries the heaviest price. Despite legal battles, Jimi Hendrix's musical genius remained undeniable. His guitar playing and songwriting revolutionized music, influencing artists across genres to this day. Hendrix's story offers valuable lessons for aspiring musicians, highlighting the importance of balancing creative passion with business acumen. The enduring power of Hendrix's music is evident in his posthumous success. His annual album sales now surpass those during his lifetime, a remarkable feat that speaks to the timeless quality of his work. As Guitar Player magazine aptly noted, he changed everything. What don't we owe Jimi Hendrix? Hendrix's innovative approach to music continues to shape and inspire new generations of musicians. His techniques, delivery, and boundary-pushing creativity have left an indelible mark on the industry. Today, decades after his passing, Hendrix's legacy lives on through his recordings and the countless artists he has influenced, cementing his status as one of the most significant figures in music history.